This is LEGO Loco,
Hey!
a sandbox city builder released back in 1998 and developed by Intelligent Games. In this game you have free reign to place down roads, buildings, train tracks and decorations in a variety of landscapes, all made of LEGO. And it is one of my favourite games of all time. I remember back as a little kid sitting for hours building cities and watching as the people and animals started to populate the land. But if you've ever tried to play a game that's over 25 years old on modern hardware, you'd know how painful the experience can be. You either have to fight compatibility modes, dive deep into INI files to get a usable resolution, or run a virtual machine that encompasses all of it. But even if you do get it to work, the games don't run flawlessly. So I thought I would set myself the challenge of bringing this old classic back to life. Modern remakes of classic games are coming out all the time, with recent notable releases like Oblivion and Croc proving that there's more life in these old games. But sadly, for most classics, a remake is just never going to happen. A lot of the games from the 90s and early 2000s were developed by companies that just don't exist anymore, and the rights to these titles end up in a pile of liquidated assets passed around from company to company. LEGO Loco, for example, was developed by Intelligent Games, who closed down in 2002, meaning the source code for this project was most likely lost in that transition. And that is where I come in. If you don't know anything about rebuilding or remaking old games, there's basically two approaches that you can take. The first is by taking the source code of the game and porting it to a modern platform. This is usually the approach that professional remasters take, as the studios generally have access to the source code directly. If you don't have access to the source code, however, what you can do is decompile the final product. This is a long and arduous task that can take years and years to pull off. And the simplest way to describe this process is that it's like unbaking a cake. You can't just separate all of the parts again, you have to study what's there and try to replicate it. I would highly recommend watching Matt Casey's video on the incredible task of decompiling Lego Island, as he breaks down the years of work that he and his team have done to decompile that iconic game. The other method, and the one I'm going to be doing, is by simply remaking it from scratch with the general essence of the game, as opposed to the literal code being used. I'll still be using all of the art assets, however, so let's take a look at how to actually get those. The first thing I need to do is get all of the files from the game and convert them into something usable. I've got the ISO for the game here, and by using Power ISO, I can extract all of the compiled files from it. The problem is that all of the sprites, videos and sounds are all packed into this file here, resource.rfd. Now, this isn't a normal file that I can just open up and pull from. This is compiled in a way that makes sense for the game, and that's about it. So I need to find a way to actually use them. And during my search online for this, I found an amazing community called Rock Raiders United. This forum is dedicated to modding LEGO games, with a slight focus on Rock Raiders, obviously, but they have topics on all sorts of LEGO games, including LEGO Loco. And that is when I found posts by ShinyQuagsire23. This member posted a few times about a tool that is able to unpack the resource files into usable assets, and without this, the project would basically be impossible. Originally, there was an issue with a large amount of bitmaps that were unusable, but the latest version fixed all of that, and by running the Python script, it exports all of the files nicely, ready to use. So if I take a look in this folder, you can see all of the assets from the game are right here. Here's a guy with all of his animated frames. Here's a duck waddling about, and some of the buildings ready to go. Annoyingly, all of the sprites have no transparency and instead have a pink background, but that's something that I can work with very easily. So let's get these into Unity and start this game. So here we are in Unity. I've set up a new project with all of the basics, and I'll just go through all of the initial parts of the game. The easiest bit is just slapping the background sprite down, and already this looks pretty nostalgic. I've got all of the different backgrounds here so I can change the scenes just like that. I do need to change all of the import settings as they're all the default and the camera size isn't quite right, and also the backgrounds are actually 4x3 so they wouldn't fit the screen anyway. But don't worry, I have solutions for all of these things. And what I'm going to do now is set up the entire backbone of the project. This includes the grid, the building system, tidying up the sprites a bit, and getting some extremely basic interaction going. So I'm going to work on all of that, and hopefully in the next segment of this video, you'll see something resembling LEGO Loco. And here we are. I've set up a very basic building system that closely resembles LEGO Loco's. The main focus I had with it is that when you hold the mouse down and drag it across the screen, it places buildings as you go, meaning I needed a way to include the dragging mechanic. How I've implemented it is like this. When you press the mouse down, it sets a ball in the builder to true, similar to how you would set a trigger in an FPS. And then in the builder it has a cooldown, again like a weapon controller, that counts to 0 and tries to fire off a building before resetting the countdown. The grid system works by storing a simple 2-dimensional list of integers, and to begin with, each entry is set to 0. When a building is trying to be placed, it checks the list based on the building's desired position, as well as the size, which it takes from the sprite. So for a path tile, it's 1 unit by 1 unit, but for all these houses, it's 4 by 3. So if I try to place an object that is 3 units wide and 2 units tall at 7,5 on the grid, it sets the start point to 7,5 and checks across the list 3 times and up the list 2 times, checking 6 total squares. If any of those squares return a 1, that means that they're taken and the building can't go there. If they all return a 0, then the building is placed, and updates all of these squares to a 1. To make sure the buildings are placed nicely, their pivot points are all set to the bottom left, and all values are floored instead of rounded. This means that they're always in line with the grid, and the buildings are accurately placed in the square you clicked on. But obviously, this isn't enough. I need a building menu to select all of the different options, so it's time to remake the Toybox menu. What's interesting to me is how the developers designed this case. The case and the buttons are all on a single sprite, and when you press on one of them, it overlays a shadow onto the button's area. But looking through the files, I have no idea if this is a separate sprite that they place over, or just adjusting the sprite through code. So instead, I'm going to break the buttons apart into a separate sprite and set them up with normal Unity buttons. So I've just cut them all out, placed them on a sprite sheet here, and covered them up on the original sprite. I have, however, kept the icons on the case while it's opening, and that's a frame by frame animation. So you can see them as it's opening, and once it's done, it switches to the Unity buttons instead. Now, with the Unity buttons in place, I can add the shading on click, and it looks great. I'll hook the functionality of the buttons up as I go, starting with the build menu. So the build menu in LEGO Loco is, in the nicest way, absolutely terrible. But as I am simply remaking it this time around, I guess I have to stick with it. In the toy box at the top, there are 3 categories of items. The train track is anything to do with trains, cars, and pathways for the characters to travel along. The tracks, roads, and paths are simple with corners, crossings, and other bits. And in this menu, you can also find special buildings like the train stations and depot, where you can design and spawn in your trains. The second menu is this house, which has every type of building in the game. What makes the buildings special in this game is they will start to spawn in various characters over time, with different buildings spawning different minifigs. For example, the police station will start to spawn in police officers, and the bank will spawn a businessman in. This is my favourite part of the game, building up a varied city so that all sorts of characters appear. The third menu is this tree, which has all of the decorative pieces in. Most are just for looks, but the fields and ponds actually spawn in some animals to go alongside the people in your city. The reason I say this menu sucks so much is because of the navigation. The toy box is tiny and only shows 9 options at a time, and for some insane reason, the developers decided to place these menus right above these 3 tools. The eraser simply deletes anything you click on, which is obviously useful. The undo button simply undoes the last few actions you made, which again could be useful. But this one in the middle, the bomb, is just awful. What this does is completely wipes your city clean and removes everything. And the worst part is that there's no confirmation, it just goes. Now, this is fine because you can just click undo, but sometimes, for whatever reason, it only brings back some of the city, and the rest is just gone. So when I implement these, I'll have to make sure undo works completely, and the bomb makes you confirm before it wipes away everything. Because I want this to be an accurate recreation of LEGO Loco, I spent a bit of time going through the menus and making sure that every building was in the correct order in each menu. Because the diehard ultras for this game, like myself, will be really upset if the skate shop comes before the police station. I also went through and tidied up all of the sprites, removing the pink backgrounds, deleting all of the duplicates that were in here because I have the magic of rotation now, and renaming them to actually useful names so I can find them in the sea of images. I also set up all the basic scriptable object files for these buildings so that I can add them to lists. Each tab on the build menu has its own list that it can iterate through and populate the buttons with. To set up these buttons, I could have had some way of assigning the object to the button, but I realized that the buttons don't actually need to know what object it's currently displaying, only where it is in the 3x3 grid. So instead, I gave them simple indexes from 0 to 8. When each button is pressed, it uses that index alongside an index offset noting which page it's on to pick out the right one from the list. This setup is very clean and it works perfectly. If I open the toy box, I can select each of these tabs and scroll through the options. The next thing was to control the cursor to show where the building was going to be placed. When hovering over the toy box, I'm on the normal hand cursor, but when it's over the world while in build mode, it should show the type of building it's going to place down and snap to the grid for an accurate representation of it. Originally, I went for an interesting approach where I set the cursor's image to the sprite of the building, used some maths to offset the pivot, and layered it behind the toy box with some grid snapping for the rect transform. But that was causing weird issues with some rounding error, the left side of the screen was offset, and then I couldn't build in the center column. All sorts of weirdness going on. But that was me being dumb. Instead, I just added a new game object that moves around the map based on where the building will be. Set the alpha to 150 so it's translucent, and then that's literally it. The ghost object follows the builder around whenever in build mode, and I just hide the actual cursor until I roll over the toy box. To get that effect, I just use Unity's event triggers and it all works perfectly. I haven't got the functionality for the bottom set of buttons done yet, or the eraser and undo, but I'll add those at some point. What I want to get done now is the rotation and the alternate building option. You see, not all buildings in LEGO Loco can be rotated. The train station, for example, doesn't rotate, but instead has alternate designs where the track is on the left or right side of the building. And if I just rotated the sprite, it would look dumb. So I need to add this into the building scriptable object code as a flag to say if it's a building that can be rotated and if it has alternate builds. I was going for this sort of inheritance-based scriptable object system where breaking apart normal buildings, clickables, and alternates, but I realized that this doesn't really make any sense, as buildings like the train depot have alternate designs and have interactable menus, so I couldn't have both doing it this way. So instead, I've got just one type of object, and I'll add the relevant stuff to each one, and handle actions in code based on what's there. So if the rotate ball is true, it'll rotate on a right click. If there's alternate sprites in there, it'll cycle through them. And if there's a unique menu to open, it'll open it on click. Otherwise, it'll default to the basic info panel. It's not the tidiest, but it has all the needed functionality, so who really cares? To make sure everything was working correctly with the grid, I made a basic debugging gizmo for it that draws a square in every cell and then colors it white if it's empty and red if it's full. I can use this to make sure that every building is being placed correctly and that the pivot point is in the right place instead of being offset. This is going to be especially useful later on when I plan to expand the grid to support paths, roads and tracks as separate entries for the minifig pathfinding. So with all that, let's build our first city. And I'm going to start by copying one of the classics from the original game, Cow-vill. This map only has a handful of buildings and fields in it, and it's basically just a mess of cacti, but let's see how accurate I can get it to be. A few of these buildings are still not in my version of the game, and when making this, I kept finding issues where I hadn't set a pivot point properly, or something's off with the rotation, but these are minor things that'll get sorted.
4 to 6 weeks later.
And there we are. This is my version of Cow-vill. It's very empty without any trains or people, and objects don't have layering to them yet, so it's a bit warped, but it's looking very good nonetheless, and the building system is basically all done. There's a few tweaks to do, but for the most part, gameplay is there. The next stage is to tackle all of the minifigs, from their spawning and generation to their movement and interaction across the city, which will really bring the whole game together. However, I'm going to leave that for next time. If you're watching this video in the future, the next part might already be out, so go find it. And if not, I guess you'll just have to sit there and wait, I'm afraid. But I hope you enjoyed this one. It's so fun bringing this old classic back to life, even if it's an extremely niche one that most people won't have ever heard of. Let me know what you think of the game in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to make number go up, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.